And welcome back to another podcast with Mr. Hagen. And on this podcast, we're going to continue to talk about the concept of elasticity, but we're going to change things up a little bit. We're going to get away from the math a little bit and think more about elasticity from the point of view of a graph. So I'm going to say it this way. There's two ways to think about the concept of elasticity. Number one is to actually do an elasticity calculation, and that's what I did on some of the previous elasticity videos before this one is we actually calculated the elasticity for specific points on a demand curve, and so we calculated those numbers and we said whether the answers were elastic or inelastic or unithelastic and so on. We talked about those on previous videos. What I'm focusing on in this video is not the elasticity calculation, but instead to think about the elasticity of the entire curve. So really what I mean by this is this is a relative concept. We're going to compare the elasticity of one curve to the elasticity of another curve. So it's the elasticity of the entire curve. There's no calculations that are being done here. We're not going to do any math on it. It's all going to be relative. So that we're going to be able to say things like one curve is relatively more elastic or maybe relatively more inelastic than some other curve. So really the best way to understand this is to see it. So let's look at two graphs. And on these two graphs, we have the two demand curves, and they both slope down. So here's a demand curve right here. Slopes down. Here's another demand curve. It also slopes down. But the elasticity of the slope is significantly different. So let me explain it this way. Let's imagine that my good here is haircuts, and let's say that this is my demand curve. Okay, this is Mr. Hagen's demand curve. All right, so this is me, and this is my demand curve for getting my haircut. Okay, so haircuts, that's my good, and I don't know if I can fit that in there. I'll do this, haircuts. Okay, so we got the quantity of haircuts, the price of haircuts, and we can say this: when the price of a haircut is P1, I will get whatever, Q1 haircuts, something like this. But if they raise the price, look what I do. If they raise the price, I significantly reduce the number of haircuts that I get. So I am very sensitive to the price. If you raise the price, I significantly reduce the quantity of haircuts that I get. That's for me. If you raise the price on me, I'm out the door. I'm not paying a lot of money for haircuts because I just don't care that much about what my hair looks like. So if you raise the price on me, I'm out the door. I significantly reduce the quantity of haircuts that I get. Now, my wife, that's an entirely different story. So over here, this graph is, we'll say, is for Mrs. Hagen. And she does care about getting her hair cut professionally. And so maybe when the price was P1, like it was for me at the beginning, she's getting Q1 haircuts. Right here, she's getting Q1 haircuts. And if they raise the price on my wife, she will get fewer haircuts, but not very many. She will not many fewer. She will only decrease her quantity by a very small amount. She will only decrease the quantity by this little tiny decrease. So maybe instead of getting her hair cut, every 5 weeks, she gets it cut every 6 weeks or something like this. So for both my wife and me, when the price goes up, we both decrease the quantity of haircuts that we get. Okay, both of us see a decrease in the quantity demanded. We both decrease the number of haircuts. The difference is, and this is the whole concept of elasticity, the difference is that I reduce my quantity by a lot, and she reduces her quantity only by a very little bit. So let's put some vocabulary to this. Let's add some terminology to this. So there's three ways that we're going to describe me. We're going to use these terms right here in order to describe my elasticity and my wife's elasticity with reference to haircuts. And I probably should just go back real fast and say this is my wife's demand for haircuts. So we'll just label that haircuts. So let's say what happens with me. So for me, the first thing that we're going to say here is that my demand curve for haircuts is very elastic. Okay, I'm going to say it's very elastic. And elastic just means that the curve is very flat. Okay, the curve is very flat. And the reason why it's flat, the reason why I have an elastic curve is because I consider there to be many substitutes. I consider there to be many substitutes for getting my hair cut professionally. Okay, so if you raise the price on me, I have substitutes. I have alternatives. I'm going to do things like buy some clippers and shave my hair myself, or maybe I'll just wear a hat or whatever. I'll find substitutes rather than pay for the expensive haircut. So as a result of that, I am very what we would call price sensitive. I am very price sensitive. That is to say that if you raise the price on me, I'm sensitive to that. If you raise the price, I will decrease my quantity by a lot. Okay? I have an elastic demand curve, and what makes it elastic is that I consider there to be many substitutes for getting my hair cut, and therefore I am price sensitive. Raise the price on me, I'm out the door. Now, my wife, she's the opposite. So my wife's demand curve is very steep. That is what we call inelastic. Inelastic. She has a very steep demand curve. It is very inelastic. Why? Because she considers there to be few substitutes. She considers there to be few substitutes for getting her hair cut professionally. So, I've offered to cut her hair for her. We go buy some clippers, but, she does not consider those to be viable substitutes. So for her, if they raise the price, she's got to keep getting her hair cut professionally. She'll decrease by a little bit, but not by very much, because she doesn't have substitutes. What else is she going to do? She's got to pay the bills, because she does not consider, she's got to get her hair cut professionally, because she does not consider there to be many substitutes. And therefore, she is what we would call price insensitive. She is price insensitive. Why is she price insensitive? She's price insensitive because she does not consider there to be very many substitutes. There are few substitutes. So you raise the price, she's not sensitive to that. She'll decrease her quantity, but by only a very little bit. So she has an inelastic demand curve. So these are generally true. A flat elastic demand curve is when somebody has many substitutes and they're price sensitive. An inelastic demand curve is when they have few substitutes and they are very price sensitive. So we would say, looking at it from the point of view number 2, no calculations, we would say that my wife, her demand curve for haircuts is inelastic relative to mine. Or we could say my demand curve is elastic relative to hers. Okay, so that's our other way of thinking about elasticity without doing calculations. We're thinking about the entire curve. Thanks for joining me on another podcast, and we'll see you on the next Econ podcast.